Don't drop the baby. Rats don't like cliffs, no matter how long you make them live in the dark. That was the conclusion of a 1957 research study at Cornell University that involved a group of rodents who wore little hoods to completely cover their eyes for 90 days. In what must have seemed to them like a miraculous recovery from blindness, the rats had their hoods removed and their sight restored, only to find themselves on the brink of a precipice. The goal of the study was to determine whether rats still had depth perception after living in the dark for months at a time. It was a kinder and simpler alternative to earlier studies that involved training rodents to leap from one elevated platform to another, presumably because they were starving for a morsel of food that awaited them across the chasm. The trained jumping rats would then be subjected to temporary blinding, with a hood placed over their eyes for a time, before being sent out to jump for their meals again. The Cornell study was much safer for the rats. There was no leaping involved, and not even a real chasm. Instead, it was what the researchers called a visual cliff. It consisted of a table made of a sheet of clear plate glass. A narrow board on top of the glass divided the experimental apparatus into two sections. On one side, an opaque layer was applied to the underside of the glass. On the other, it was just clear glass, revealing a drop of a foot or more. To rats, who presumably are not familiar with the properties of glass, the side with the opaque applique would resemble safe and solid ground. The transparent portion would effectively be invisible, as far as the rats were concerned, giving them the impression of a yawning abyss. The researchers could adjust the distance to the floor under the glass to tune the rodent's fear factor. The premise going into the experiment was that the hoods preventing the rats from seeing would degrade their depth perception if they wore them long enough. Presumably, it would hamper the rats' abilities to tell that there was a drop-off under the visual cliff. When the Cornell team ran the experiment, they found that any effect the hoods had was short-lived. Within 20 minutes of being dehooded and placed on the experimental apparatus, the rats were just as likely to avoid the cliffside of the board as their littermates, who were raised without hoods. It was an anticlimactic outcome, with an intriguing side note. Rats, it seemed, are innately afraid of heights.